I like the scenes that he did with the various women too, especially with his grandmother. And his
the grandmother and
the scene in the underground toilet.
Yeah.
In the WC, that was an amazing scene. She has a stroke coming out of it.
And they're all looking at their watch, and he can't get anybody. And then the one doctor gives her 15 minutes and asking her questions and kind of feeling her and smiling at her, and then walks out of the room and says it's hopeless. And then how the mother and the grandmother deal and Francois. And combing the hair and then combing the hair after she dies, and then he doesn't react to the death. So death isn't when it happens. That's when we say it's happening.
Right. Yeah. No. His whole sense of time is emotional time, and it's when you feel it. It's happening when you feel it.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't happen. And, it's a funny non-dualist sort of attitude. You're not separate from me, so until I feel it, it didn't happen to you, finally.
Right. And then I was reading today, just going through the pages, the scene where, again, they're in Baalbek, he's crying about Albertine all night. His mother hears him crying, the sunlight's coming in, and his mother comes in, but she's disheveled, and he thinks it's his grandmother. He can't tell if he's asleep or awake.
Right.
And he's seeing his grandmother and his mother, and then they watch. Then his mother points to the sunset, and says, "This is what your grandmother would have saw." And they look out the window, and all he sees superimposed on it is Albertine sleeping with some other chick. And he can't get back into the mode, and he's back into his obsession.
So obsessed.
And he's again that's life.
Did you?
That's like life.
Well, I mean, he talks about
his life.
He talks about Swann being obsessed in the first book, and then of course
Swann was nothing.
He was nothing compared to him and Alberto.
Alberto. But
well, it was a pretty sexy book. I thought it was so sexy. The jealousy, and his really wanting to eat her flesh. I mean, the way he talks about her.
It's always food. Always.
But she was, the way he described her, I wanted her desperately.
Yeah.
She was just so desirable. Somehow there's something about
and it was this big passion there was this understatement. Because again they didn't get, there was this, so there's a lot of sex going on. It was very understated and.
Well, yeah, it was. I mean, he described it up to. It's funny. You're interested in where the line gets drawn, where they stop saying. Obviously, he couldn't say it was a guy. He couldn't say that Albertine was really built based on a couple of his lovers. I don't know. Subsequently, interestingly, as a sidebar, I followed the career a little bit of Reynaldo Hahn.
Right.
Who was quite a wonderful writer, or a composer. Not a particularly deep composer, but a composer of salon music and operettas and so forth, and wrote some very nice chamber music, which has recently been, in the time that since I've read Proust, there have been 2 or 3 records that have come out. The music that he describes, that little Vinteuil.
The Vinteuil sonata.
Yeah. The little phrase.
The little phrase.
That keeps repeating. I've read 4 or 5 different people's attempt to assign exactly whose music that was. And it's someplace between Fauré and Debussy, but I think it's Franck. I think it's the Franck A minor sonata. Because that has one kernel, like the Beethoven Fifth that I was humming before, that he just, it turns like the way Proust turns the whole understanding of understanding a character. He takes that little, I never had that thought, but it's the same thing. It's this little kernel at the top. It's a violin and piano. And he turns it, and it keeps coming back. And that's what Proust keeps talking about, is the return of this. It's being set up now harmonically, and there's that little phrase again, and he loses his mind and thinks of whatever he thinks of.
The year before, at an evening party, he had heard a piece of music played on the piano and violin. At first he had appreciated only the material quality of the sounds which those instruments secreted. And it had been a source of keen pleasure when, below the narrow ribbon of the violin part, delicate, unyielding, substantial, and governing the whole, he had suddenly perceived, where it was trying to surge upwards in a flowing tide of sound, the mass of the piano part, multiform, coherent, level, and breaking everywhere in melody like the deep, deep blue tumult of the sea, silvered and charmed into a minor key by the moonlight. But at a given moment, without being able to distinguish any clear outline or to give a name to what was pleasing him, suddenly enraptured, he had tried to collect, to treasure in his memory, the phrase or harmony, he knew not which, that had just been played, and had opened and expanded his soul, just as the fragrance of certain roses wafted upon the moist air of evening has the power of dilating our nostrils. This time he had distinguished quite clearly a phrase which emerged for a few moments from the waves of sound. It had at once held out to him an invitation to partake of intimate pleasures, of whose existence, before hearing it, he had never dreamed, into which he felt that nothing but this phrase could initiate him, and he had been filled with love for it, as with a new and strange desire.
Again, using the all the emotions, we were talking about what Proust did is
you try to,
he felt any given moment, and he felt it fully.
Right. And then he's had another moment, which is the Buddha side of him, because he doesn't say, this guy's a jerk. You see Charlus being an absolutely wonderful gentleman, generous. You see him acting this way, and then he actually getting beaten up and acting terrible, racist, and all. You see all these different sides. And, that doesn't work in Hollywood. I mean, you've got to have a white hat or a black hat, basically. Right. I mean, And I think that's the attitude of Jack Kerouac, too, that he wants to find out what's going on. He has his limits, far greater, more stringent limits than Marcel Proust, who really, perhaps because he was a homosexual and, had that whole sense of being oppressed and being secret and, having to keep shit out of other people's eyes. I don't know. I once asked Gore Vidal that. I told you. In the interview book, I talk about the bingo question, which is the question that either gets you the greatest answer on earth or gets kicked out of the house. And I asked Gore Vidal after a really good interview. I had enough on tape. So I said, so what is it that gives you your outsider vision? You're from like a fifth generation Tidewater aristocrat. I said, was it being gay that gave you this sense of what it's like to be outside? He went crazy. He said, that's right, you Americans. Only in America, people think you're gay. There are no such thing as homosexual people. There are homosexual activities.
Yeah, Gore.
I said, okay, let it be like you say. And packed up my machine. I was wrapped already.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of blind spot, which Marcel Proust doesn't really seem to have. He's asked him. Remember, he goes through the whole Jewish question. He goes through the whole Dreyfus question.
Well, Dreyfus is so interesting.
Right. Yeah. He goes through that, and you get the chance at all of these things to see other sides of him, and he lets them come out. Now, I must be overlooking something because...
Well, one of the things that's interesting about him is he stayed very, very passive in all this. He took...
In the Dreyfus especially.
And he let everybody else take he played all the sides of the story. Without...
He was the reporter, really.
Right,
but he quite clearly approved.
Right, he was moving the puppets. It wasn't just random. These things were happening out of his imagination. He were letting things talk. And Swan,
but the role he assigns to the Marcel character is one who reports all of these things happening,
right,
rather than driving them.
And then his vehicle is he lets everybody. He was like I don't know, maybe he was like Truman Capote, and everybody would want to whisper in his ear or something. Capote was a
wire.
Yeah,
sure,
and that's what he was. And he came out of the Somerset Mom School. Travel around with your typewriter, collect the stories, get the dirty laundry, and leave town. And leave disaster in your wake.
Yeah. Whereas Jack traveled through life creating disaster.
Well, but they switched it inside. The disasters were the fun.
Right. Oh yeah. Right.
That was.
Because of the repressed society, he was busting out of it. He was. He thought. Didn't get very far out. He wrote some wonderful stuff, though. God damn, what a genius, Jack Kerouac.
Yeah.
I think he may be the great American writer. I really do think he is. The more I read of his stuff, the more I was convinced. Because nobody else looks that deeply into himself and exposes himself as mercilessly.
Yeah, on the road, then the last thing is this Marcel Proust cat, and that's the last conversation that Dean Moriarty has as he gets out in Times Square. One of the things I want to do with these is about the experience that we had reading this. Yes. It's not about his life. It's about the interaction between the reader,
absolutely,
and the book.
Absolutely.
I mean, you and I had a big experience doing this. Going
a year-long epiphany.
Going back and every day you're having different reactions. I'm having different reactions, and we're each going back in our life.
Oh yeah, it's really an acid test. It really is. It really makes you reassess almost everything in your life. I mean, finally, that's
nothing has. In Search of a Lost Time, again, the meaning is you don't know what it means until you go. I mean, he had so many random adventures. You don't know what it all means. You don't know the master plan until you go back and see how everything. This links to this, and this links to this. Let's hold it up one more time as we go out. Shall we close in on that?
Yeah, push to it.
Sweet girl. God only knows.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway, that's it.
Baby.
Yeah. Yeah. Good to see you, man. What wonderful energy. We used to have some great times.